Tiger King Joe Exotic is still in prison, but there were some characters in the Netflix show who may be worse than the king himself, like wild animal park operator Tim Stark. How PETA shut him down and rescued his animals with assist from federal agents. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, how the PETA legal team is taking apart the big cat petting zoo industry around the country, made infamous by Tiger King Joe Exotic. Exotic still in prison, serving a sentence of more than 20 years on 2 counts of murder for hire and 19 wildlife charges. But then there's another animal park operator, Tim Stark, considered to be far worse than Joe Exotic himself. 3 years ago, PETA sued Stark and his Greater Wynnewood Exotic Animal Park under the Endangered Species Act, and just this year won that suit. Now Stark is on the lam, and PETA recently needed assistance from a convoy of federal marshals to rescue Stark's abandoned animals, including 3 lions and 1 lion who died before rescue. Brittany Peet, the PETA Foundation's Deputy General Counsel for Captive Animal Law Enforcement, tells the story on the PETA Podcast. You know, Brittany, we talked about this in one of our earlier podcasts in the first season about filing a suit. And I always think that, oh, here comes a suit. It's going to take forever. But forever was actually neatly defined as 3 years. I mean, that's not that long, right?
Right. It's not too bad. We always wish that justice could happen for the animals so much more quickly. And it really is tragic because it didn't come soon enough for some animals who didn't make it.
Right.
But thankfully, we prevailed in this lawsuit against Tim Stark and Wildlife in Need. We were able to rescue 25 big cats about a week ago, and most importantly, we were able to get precedents on the books, finding that declawing big cats, prematurely separating endangered big cats from their mothers and using them in public encounters violates the Endangered Species Act. So we were able to accomplish our objective, and we always try to use this 2-pronged approach where we are trying to end the worst abuses of captive wildlife as well as rescue the victims in these lawsuits that we file.
And it only took 3 years, which, isn't short, but it isn't like dragged on. And unfortunately, some animals were, you couldn't spare them, but you did get a good number. And we'll talk about that. But let's go back to the beginning, because when we talked 3 years ago, PETA was filing this suit against Tim Stark. Tim Stark since went on to great fame in Tiger King. All of this was happening at the same time. How did the suit play into Tiger King's success? And how did the show maybe accelerate what happened with the suit?
I think that Tiger King was paying close attention to the biggest players in the industry when they were deciding who to focus on. And Tim Stark was one of the biggest players in the big cat cub petting industry. And he also had close relationships with 2 of the other main stars, quote unquote, of the series, Joe Exotic and Jeff Lowe. Tim Stark acquired many of the big cats that he used in cub encounters throughout the years from Joe Exotic. And after Joe went to prison, Tim Stark and Jeff Lowe teamed up for a while and were planning to open another roadside zoo in Oklahoma together. But they ultimately fell out. And that was documented in Tiger King. I don't think that Tiger King impacted the result of our lawsuit or the timing. We were really already well underway by the time Tiger King came out and the cards were on the table. Tim Stark had repeatedly refused to comply with court orders. He'd repeatedly disrespected the court. It was clear to the court and to everyone else that Tim Stark abused animals and that he had no intention to stop. And that unless and until the court issued a ruling prohibiting him from ever again owning these endangered big cats, he would continue abusing and exploiting them. And so thankfully we were able to get a ruling without having to go to trial.
So this is the Endangered Species Act you're using to enforce the law. Is it rare to see this sort of thing before going to trial? Because usually I'd imagine it's people are fighting tooth and nail to see PETA prevail on this. How rare is it to see this kind of ruling by a judge before trial, on the Endangered Species Act?
It is rare, but it is rare in general, but PETA has been bucking that trend lately. So the case was filed under the Endangered Species Act on behalf of endangered lions, tigers, and lion-tiger hybrids. We won this case after filing a motion for summary judgment, and that's basically just saying, Judge, you can rule on the issues in the case because there are no disputed material facts. So here's our case. Nothing is in dispute. You should rule in our favor. And typically a court will say, no. There are still facts that we need to determine at trial. In this case, on the issues of declawing, premature maternal separation, and cub petting, the court found that we were right. There were no disputed issues of material fact in this case, and they were ready to move on to final judgment. In two other recent Endangered Species Act cases that PETA has filed, both against the Tri-State Zoological Park, we won partial summary judgment in that case relating to veterinary issues for one of the endangered tigers in that case. We did go to trial on the remaining issues and prevailed at trial. And then another case, which also related to tiger cub petting against Dade City's Wild Things, a roadside zoo in Florida. PETA ended up winning that case on a default judgment. And that was because of all of the misconduct that the defendants in that case perpetrated throughout the case. So we've got a pattern now of at least partially winning some cases without having to go to trial.
And so what kind of message does this send to the whole, tiger petting industry that Tim Stark and Melissa Lane and who was his ex-wife, and to the people, the players? I imagine when you talk about Tim Stark, was he bigger than Joe Exotic or on the same level, or where would you put him in the hierarchy of people in this field?
Well, Joe Exotic was the big kahuna in terms of breeding. He was the primary supplier of big cat cubs for the cub petting industry across the country while he was operating. And Tim Stark was one of the primary big cat cub petting operators in the country. Other than Joe, probably the biggest. And what made Tim Stark particularly unique was his sadism. He bragged about beating a leopard to death with a baseball bat. He encouraged patrons to smack tiger cubs in the face when they got too rambunctious. When the USDA told him to stop doing that, he gave his employees riding crops and had them hit the tiger cubs in the face with the riding crops. He was also seen repeatedly kicking a tiger cub in a recent cub encounter. He's also one of the few big cat exhibitors left in the country who actually declawed big cats. Even Joe Exotic, when I first met him, told me that declawing was too cruel for him. So if something is too cruel for Joe Exotic, you know you're dealing with a really bad guy.
Wow. So that's a revealing fact, because declawing is a big part of the suit. And I was going to ask you that, if here's Tim Stark and he's advocating like smacking these cubs around and he only does it because he's declawed them, right? I mean, if they were clawed, it would be even more dangerous.
He declaws them so it's safer for him to interact with them once they've aged out of cub petting. These guys they possess these big cats. It's all part of their narcissism and machismo to show that they're these big, tough men who can go into cages with full-grown lions and tigers. But Tim Stark wanted to make it easier for himself. And so he debilitated these big cats by amputating their claws, and it would be the equivalent of amputating our fingers at the first knuckle. And they use those claws for so many things throughout their lives. So it really does cripple these animals for the rest of their lives and causes lifelong physical debility as well as psychological issues, because they're prevented from engaging in normal behaviors like scratching and digging.
Yeah, and a lot of people might think, "Oh, declawing, that's just like trimming your toenails," but it's a lot for a big cat. It's a lot more serious. It's not. It doesn't regrow, and it also leaves psychological damage. So,
right, it's an amputation. It's major surgery, and sometimes they do regrow. But when they regrow, they don't just regrow. They regrow into the paw pad, and that's just one of the complications, one of the many complications that can occur from this surgery. And this ruling against Tim Stark, finding that declawing violates the Endangered Species Act, is actually the second precedent that PETA has put on the books relating to endangered big cats and declawing. PETA also filed a related suit against Tim Stark's veterinarian, Dr. Rick Pelfrey, who wasn't just Tim Stark's veterinarian, but is actually a veterinarian for horses who race in the Kentucky Derby. And in PETA's suit against Dr. Pelfrey, we were able to achieve a settlement and get an agreed upon court victory, that again finds that declawing endangered cats violates the ESA. And as part of that, Dr. Pelfrey also agreed to never again practice veterinary care with big cats.
well, so the effect of this is it to, I mean, if Stark was the biggest of the declawers, is this going to make people, and if Lion King Joe Exotic said, "Hey, that's even too cruel for me," are we talking about a small number of people who continue this practice and who will be shaking in their boots once they hear that this precedent now exists? And does it assure that we will maybe not see any more declawers?
Based on what we've seen, Tim Stark was the last one who was doing this, at least in relation to tigers and lions who were used in cub petting. So this ruling should have ended that practice, but it also puts everyone else on notice who might consider doing this in the future, that this isn't just cruel, but it violates federal law. And that goes for the entirety of the opinion. It goes for the premature maternal separation of big cat cubs from their mothers and the use of big cat cubs in public encounters in general. This entire industry is on notice. And all of the exhibitors out there who are wondering if they're next on PETA's hit list, they are, because we're watching them all. We're ready, and we're ready to use this precedent against the entire industry.
Well, how can they exist if this precedent? I mean, how can they exist as a petting, a business? How can they do anything given these? I mean, what is the legal way you can do this? Is there any legal way that this kind of business can continue?
Well, based on how legal precedent works, so the fact that these activities, premature maternal separation, declawing and the use of big cats in cub petting, it's not codified under federal law as illegal. So the legislature hasn't passed a law saying that. So, it's not necessarily something that law enforcement authorities are going to enforce. And the Endangered Species Act is so rarely enforced by federal law enforcement authorities in the first place. That's why PETA has been bringing these suits, because no one else is doing it.
Right.
So at this point, we continue filing these suits, but every single time we file and every time we win, our cases get so much stronger and so much easier to win. It also has the chilling effect, not only of exhibitors across the country having to worry that they're violating federal law, but if PETA files these lawsuits against these facilities, we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees for a federal lawsuit like this. And most of these businesses couldn't sustain a hit like that.
And so PETA has to enforce one by one. How many of these type of outfits are there out there that should be a concern to the public? In other words, the public shouldn't patronize. The public should let people know that they exist. How large is the industry now, given this suit and given the publicity of Tiger King?
The good news is that since we've been able to help put Joe Exotic in prison, I'm sure we'll be talking about this later, we've run Jeff Lowe out of business, and have a pending suit against him. We've put Tim Stark out of business. They were the primary suppliers of cubs. So the supply there of big cat cubs for this industry is dwindling. So there are still a few roadside zoos that are offering cub petting, but the industry is quickly dying because there just aren't enough breeders out there to support it anymore.
I mean, there's no importers, on the horizon saying, I'm going to go in, there's this void now, I'm going to capitalize on Tiger King. Nothing like that. Or the other thing is, has the publicity from Tiger King been so bad that people are just turned off to the whole idea of roadside zoos and tiger cub?
I think that's a big part of it too. Just as the supply is dwindling thanks to PETA's efforts, the demand is dwindling too, not just due to Tiger King, but the publicity that our lawsuits have generated also help to educate the public about why this industry is so cruel. So there just isn't the demand that there may have been 1 or 2 years ago, because of Tiger King and the educational efforts that animal rights organizations like PETA are pushing. So we really are succeeding in our effort to eradicate this industry. And we set this goal just a few years ago, and we're further along than even we had expected.
All right. So you won this suit. It's a big deal. It sets precedent. It sends a message throughout the tiger cub petting industry, which, they should be scared. But now, once you won the suit in August, I believe, right? No, was it August or? Well, you won the suit, but it wasn't over because you had to save the animals. Tell me about what happened once the lawsuit was won, the problems that came up because the question was who's going to care for the cubs and the animals.
That's right. So and just as Tim Stark is sadistic to animals, he's also violent to humans. And so we had to identify reputable sanctuaries that were willing to take on these animals, to transport them, and to go on Stark's property to physically remove the animals. And Stark had claimed repeatedly over the years that no one would ever come on his property and take his animals alive. He repeatedly claimed that he had explosives wired to the tigers' cages that he could detonate with his phone. He was a sniper in the Army and a munitions expert. So these weren't just empty threats. And we know that he owns a large number of guns. And so in addition to lining up the forever homes for these animals, we also had to line up security. And just about a week before we were going in to take the animals out, Stark posted an expletive-filled diatribe on Facebook Live in which he threatened violence on the federal judge in our case, PETA attorneys, and he brandished a rifle during that video, and again said that he was willing to die for his beliefs, and that no one would ever come in and take his animals. So as a result of that video and some of the other threats Stark made, the judge in our case allowed federal marshals or ordered federal marshals to come with us. And so when we ultimately went into the facility, there were dozens of law enforcement with us. We drove in with a convoy. They blocked traffic, and we were ultimately able to safely get every one of the animals out. Tim Stark was also banned from the property. But by that point, there was also a warrant out for his arrest due to contempt in another related case relating to the rest of the animals on his property. So by the time we went in to take the animals, he was on the run.
Wow, that sounds like a kind of a movie. You go into rescue and the marshals are there. Here comes the posse to save the wildlife and need animals. How did that make you feel?
Well, it made me feel safe. This was a rescue that we'd been worried about for a long time in terms of safety. Because our objective is to get animals out and to sanctuary safely. And we wanted to do everything that we possibly could to make this rescue as safe as possible for the animals, but also for the rescue team. And so having the law enforcement back up there, it just meant that we could focus on the job at hand, getting the animals out quickly, safely, and humanely. And that's exactly what we did. One of the things, and we've talked on the PETA podcast for a few years about this case, about Joe Exotic. And at every point when you're meeting the animals, I'm wondering, God, Brittany's got to be a little scared. I mean, her safety must be she must be in question, because these are not these are felons. These are not good guys. And so when you said that you felt safe with the marshals, how about at any point? I mean, here's the thing: at any point of our conversations over the last 3 years, I never thought that maybe you felt unsafe, because I'd see video of you at confronting Joe Exotic, and it's like, okay, well, this is just what I do, right? This is what we do as an activist. But how has your sense of personal safety been challenged through these fights, working, to bring these animal abusers to justice? Yeah, it's an interesting question, because it's something that we think about a lot, I think, going into these situations, how we're going to prepare for them. But once we're in the situation, or once I'm in the situation, I'm just not thinking about that. I'm thinking about the job, getting the animals out and helping the animals. And, especially when you have law enforcement with you, it makes it so much easier to not have to think about anything else. So, when you're actually doing the job and going in and rescuing the animals, that's what the focus is.
Well, you had a convoy, and you had the law enforcement. They were there to protect you. And I was reading where you saw someone driving off Tim Stark's truck as you guys were approaching. So people were fleeing, or?
by the time we got in, Tim Stark wasn't there. He was seen as one of the sanctuaries was leaving the facility. He was spotted nearby taking photos of their trailers. So we reported that immediately to law enforcement. He was not apprehended. He still has not been apprehended. He posted a video on Facebook Live just 2 nights ago in which he claimed that he would not go to jail. He held up a hand grenade and said that anyone who tries to handcuff him better think twice, and said that he would not be taken alive.
Well, the penalty for losing this suit, it's civil, not criminal, is it? Or, I mean, the Endangered Species Act doesn't make one a criminal necessarily, but you have to cease and desist your operations, and I guess he loses his stock of animals.
So in terms of the remedy for PETA's lawsuit, he can never again own endangered big cats unless he's able to prove to the court that he can care for them humanely, which he will never be able to do. But there was a parallel suit filed by the state of Indiana that PETA assisted by submitting extensive evidence to the state that related to nonprofit violations. Stark's extensive rating of wildlife and needs funds for personal use, including to buy himself fancy trucks, to spend nights at the strip club. And so as part of that suit, the state was able to, in the days before PETA went in to get the big cats, take every other animal off the property. And it was because of Stark's contempt in that suit, including by hiding animals. And there are still 23 animals who are missing and unaccounted for, that the state is trying to locate to send to appropriate facilities, as well as Stark's threatening of violence toward attorneys with the state attorney general's office. So that's why that arrest warrant was initially issued. It was issued to incarcerate Tim for the period that the state was removing animals from his property, and he was required to tell the court where the animals were, or he would be incarcerated. So the arrest warrant was issued, and he is still on the lam. Yeah. Since then, he's also been charged with 2 felonies, both for battery against one of the assistant attorney generals in the state's case and intimidation against the assistant attorney general. So Tim Stark is in a lot of trouble. So
the number of animals that PETA was able to get were a couple dozen, and then there's still some that you don't know about, right?
So all of the endangered big cats who were subject to PETA's suit were accounted for. We rescued 25 total, 22 in Indiana at Wildlife in Need, and then we traveled to Oklahoma to rescue 3 juvenile lions who Stark had sent to Jeff Lowe at the Greater Wynnewood Exotic Animal Park.
And there's still some unaccounted for that. Where might they be, you think?
So there are still 23 animals who are unaccounted for, who are part of the state's suit. There are a number of birds, some primates, and some other mammals who are unaccounted for. Some of those animals would be extremely valuable. And so the suspicion is that Stark sold them.
And so now and there's no way you can get them back, or no way that you know to whom he sold them to, or are they tagged? Or, I mean, can you do some kind of paper chase?
The state is continuing to investigate where those animals are. Once Stark is apprehended, according to the arrest warrant, he will be incarcerated until the time that he reveals the locations of those animals.
Wow. So he's got to live up to the suit and the law is pursuing it. And so that's good to know, because a lot of times you just see where someone drops a ball and, and people are allowed to continue on. So let's talk about, now you got the animals, you had to place them somewhere. How difficult was that? And have all the recovered animals now been put in places, sanctuaries that are worthy?
Yes, all 25 of the endangered big cats PETA rescued are living at GFAS, Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, accredited sanctuaries. 8 of the cats went to the Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge in Arkansas, and the remaining 14 went to the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Keansburg, Colorado. We've worked with both of those sanctuaries in the past. They're extremely professional, qualified, experienced. The cats couldn't be in better hands, which is great because a lot of them are suffering from extremely serious issues. A lot of times, cubs who are used for cub petting, when they're prematurely separated from their mothers, they have serious nutritional deficiencies. And there's a disease called metabolic bone disease that a lot of these cubs suffer. And they're so deprived of calcium and other nutrients that their bones become so brittle that they will break. And so one of the lions who was rescued, for example, Chief, he has severe lameness in his rear legs, and the sanctuary's veterinarian suspects that he had metabolic bone disease as a cub, and that one of his rear legs had been broken at one point and never treated.
And certainly none of these animals would be suffering from this if they weren't involved or weren't entangled in this tiger cub petting business, right?
That's absolutely right. Unless you're going to be exploiting baby tigers for cub petting and for profit, there's absolutely no reason to prematurely separate a cub from their mother. And if there is, for some reason, in the rare instance that there's an actual medical necessity, at another facility or for wildlife rehabilitation, any reputable facility will continue to attempt to reintroduce the cub until they're able to be reunited, or they'll find a surrogate mother, because it's so critically important, not only for the cubs to get the nutrients from the mother's milk, but to experience that socialization and to learn the lessons that only another tiger can teach you. And these big cats, these tigers and lions in the wild, they stay with their mothers for 2 years. So depriving them of all of that care, it causes lifelong psychological trauma. And we saw that with one of the juvenile lions we rescued from Jeff Lowe's facility. His name is Leo, and he was held with his sisters, Amelia, Nala, and Kahari. Kahari died a few weeks before we were able to rescue these cats, and they're only a year old. So this underscores just how poorly they were cared for. And Leo exhibits what's called a suckling behavior, and where he will latch onto his sister's ears as if they were his mother's teat and try to nurse on them. He suckles on them, to the point where his sister's ears are visibly wet at all times. And this is an abnormal behavior that you only see in animals who've been prematurely separated from their mothers.
And is it presumed that once they're in the sanctuaries, life will get better? Their symptoms or their what the maladies will be treated, and can they become normal big cats in sanctuary?
These cats, these 3 juvenile lions in particular, they have a long way to go. They couldn't be in better hands, but Nala, one of the females, she's so debilitated and lame that she can barely walk. She takes a few steps and she stumbles. There's video at PETA.org where you can see Nala, the first night that she arrived at the sanctuary, with her siblings, but barely able to walk. So she had an MRI at Colorado State University yesterday. They're doing everything that they can to get to the bottom of these issues. These lions also suffered from severe fly strike at Jeff Lowe's roadside zoo. That's where at facilities that are unsanitary, where feces isn't cleaned up. And at Jeff Lowe's facility, part of the problem is that he had so little regard for the cats that he was exploiting that when they died, he would simply throw them on a burn pile out back, and flies would swarm. They would take over the facility. They would land on these cubs' ears, and they would lay eggs. And then the hatched maggots eat away at the animals' ears. So all of these cubs suffered from severe fly strike. They're all emaciated. Two of them have had amputated toes from various injuries. They have wounds. The horrific conditions and cruelty that these cats have suffered in their 1 year of life are baffling to imagine. And that's exactly why on the same day that we took those 3 cubs out of Jeff Lowe's facility, PETA filed its notice of intent to sue Jeff Lowe and his associates under the Endangered Species Act to ensure that he is never, ever able to inflict this cruelty on cats again. And we're ready to see him in court.
So, I was going to say, not necessarily a happy ending for the 1-year-old cats, but PETA is still pursuing it. And the story isn't over for Tim Stark because he still needs to be apprehended. So it's we're going to talk about this for not a long time, but ongoing story. Absolutely.
Yes, it's an ongoing story. Jeff Lowe is in the process of moving the animals that he has left to another roadside zoo in Thackerville, Oklahoma now. And not only PETA, but the USDA are going after him right now. The USDA has also filed suit against both Jeff and his wife Lauren to ensure that they can never again have animal exhibitor licenses, which would mean if the USDA is successful in their suit, that neither one of them can ever profit off animal exploitation again. So that suit and PETA's suit will work together to not only ensure that they can never profit off animal abuse, but that they can never again own threatened and endangered animals.
And that would be a great thing. And yet there's still, the industry still still goes on with other folks around the country. And the only way to really stop that is if people don't patronize these places.
That's absolutely right. We could end this industry tomorrow if everyone would simply stop buying tickets to pet baby tigers. The other important thing that everyone can do is anytime you see a friend or family member on social media posting a photo or video of themselves posing with a big cat cub, as PETA says, never be silent. Call them out on it. If you don't know what to say, go to PETA.org. There's plenty of information about why big cat cub petting is wrong and why it causes a lifetime of cruelty for the animals who are exploited in it.
Brittany, I can't let you go without asking for a Tiger King update. And, everyone, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like the big hit because it happened to be on Netflix, coincidentally. And I guess it's sort of waned somewhat, but people are curious. Well, what's the latest news? Is Joe in prison, out of prison? How about the animals? What is the status? And I know you've been following it with, as the PETA lawyer. So where is Joe Exotic? Where is the Tiger King, or what is the update now?
Joe Exotic is in federal prison, serving his 22-year sentence on 2 counts of murder for hire and 19 counts of wildlife charges. He his appeal, his attempts at appeal have thus far been unsuccessful. And at this point, he has launched a campaign to seek a presidential pardon from Donald Trump. Thus far, that has not been forthcoming. And we don't think that it will be.
And he has, when's the earliest he can get out? Is there a early parole kind of thing?
I'm not sure when Joe will be eligible for parole, but he will be in prison for a very long time. And
because I've heard things like, oh, he's out, he's not out, but he's definitely in prison still. And any fallout or any update from in terms of the effect of the program on, since he's been put in jail? I mean, have you anyone saying?
When Tiger King first came out, Joe became something of a folk hero to a certain segment of people. But I think that attitude waned as the response started to get more critical, and there was more analysis of the themes and the issues that were below the surface in Tiger King. The series didn't explore the cruelty and the cub petting industry as much as it could have. But there was a lot of critical analysis that came out after the show, that talked more about all of those issues, as well as some of the more unseemly aspects of Joe's personality, including his incessant racism, that was explicitly not shown in the show on the decision of the Tiger King producers.
Well, so more has come out, and now he's still in jail or in prison, and he will be there for a long time. Brittany, I really appreciate you updating us on the Tiger King, but I also appreciate you updating us on Tim Stark and Wildlife in Need and saving those animals, and then going after the Tim. What's the other guy?
Jeff Lowe.
Jeff Lowe, yeah, going after Jeff Lowe, because both of them had little parts in Tiger King. They were all in there.
That's right.
If fans remember.
If another season of Tiger King, I think that Tim Stark will be featured prominently. And I hope that the animal stories will be featured more prominently as well. And I think that if there's another season, they will be.
Do you think there will be? I mean, I guess Tim Stark is hoping for that.
I know that the Tiger King producers have been closely following all of these events, so we'll have to wait and see.
Why, did you have any cameras on the convoy to Wildlife in Need?
There were a number of cameras out front when we went into the facility. Yeah.
So there's our tip off. Look for it coming September 21. The next pandemic. Oh boy. Anyway,
let's hope not.
Brittany, congratulations really on your work. It's another example of what PETA activism and PETA lawyering does, on behalf of the animals. And I guess it must be gratifying to know that you started this in 2017 with the suit. And, of course, there's work that goes on before filing, but now here we are 3 years later, and you've seen a good remedy. And it's not over yet. Person has to be apprehended, and there's still about 23 more animals, but it's got to feel gratifying.
Absolutely. PETA has an incredible legal team, and we look forward to many, many more victories for the animals in the future.
Brittany Peet, thank you very much for joining us on the PETA Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Brittany Peet, the PETA Foundation's Deputy General Counsel for Captive Animal Law Enforcement, on winning a lawsuit under the Endangered Species Act against Tim Stark's GW Park. Another victory toward shutting down the big cat petting zoo industry in America. And late breaking, Stark's former business partners Jeff and Lauren Lowe have been ordered to pay thousands in court fees to PETA. And now PETA has announced it will file a new lawsuit against Stark, again under the Endangered Species Act. For more, go to PETA.org. And that's our show this time out. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.